Good afternoon and welcome to APPA's 12th Town Hall on COVID-19. My name is Billy Zidek, APPA Standards and Codes Administrator. Allow me to review a couple of housekeeping items before we start. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We ask that you utilize the chat box for the Q&A segment of this session. While we attempt to respond to all questions submitted, should we run out of time, responses will be posted to APPA's COVID-19 RAQ, Recently Asked Questions, webpage. We also remind participants to ensure their speaker volume levels are set to their comfort. Our speakers are gathering us from across the continent, and as such, varying volumes will be present. Today's session will award professional continuing education credits, as well as ISDs and AIA HSW CLUs. For AIA certificates, please email me at Billy, B-I-L-L-I-E, @appa.org, along with your AIA membership number. Our webinar recordings will be posted to the APPA website later this afternoon. Additionally, you'll receive a follow-up email within 72 hours providing designated links to all webinar recordings, presentation slides, as well as information on upcoming webinars and town halls. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Lander Medlin, APPA's Executive Vice President, your moderator for today. Lander, take it away.
Thank you, Billy. Welcome all attendees. We appreciate your engagement in these town hall meetings as we further explore the impact of COVID-19 on our facilities organizations and the education enterprise. I'd like to thank both our regular participants for continuing to join us and any new folks who decided to do so today. Our prior town halls have been recorded along with answers to all your questions and posted to the APPA COVID-19 website resource center. It is constantly being updated, so please return regularly. And our town hall meetings do occur every Friday at this time with a different target and focus. Hint, next week's is called Institutional Duos, The Road to Reopening with Your Senior Leadership, featuring duos from Johnson County Community College, the University of Arizona, and Spelman College. Again, thank you so much for joining the dialogue. We really want your questions. That's what makes this a rich conversation and the special community we share. So post them at any time. At the close of my weekly membership message this past Monday, I said, pain from a global pandemic, pain from cultural realities and systemic inequalities. We all have a responsibility to do our part to effect meaningful change. We can do this by pursuing the path of compassion, empathy, and sympathy. Let's use our voices to make change happen. In union, there is strength. Now, with strength of purpose to combat this novel coronavirus, institutions are carving out their path to a fall reopening. Facilities are at the ready, planning and preparing in great detail. That's why we chose this topic today, the next in our series on the road to reopening your institution. Impact of COVID-19 dedensifying your spaces. These two institutional duos, consisting of 4 panelists, have prepared some fantastic visuals to demonstrate and discuss their reopening plans and the social distancing measures they are employing to de-densify their physical space. So here's the format for today's town hall. I'll provide an introduction to set the context, introduce our stellar panel duos who will provide detailed framing remarks, move to Q&A, and I'll conclude with highlighting a new website resource, call for images, available resources, save the date, and closing remarks. As you know, I've opened each town hall with a compare and contrast of the coronavirus statistics. It is a sobering reality that the surge in mobility is driving up transmission. As of yesterday, the U.S. recorded over 2 million cases, approaching 114,000 deaths. The pace in the U.S. has picked up again 2 weeks out from Memorial Weekend and numerous states reopening, and is growing around the world. We still await the impact from the continued mass protests. Institutions' plans for reopening remain dependent on testing kits, contact tracing capabilities, possible treatments, and the hope for an early available vaccine. We desperately need systems in place. Yet we do know that health professionals urge and research supports social physical distancing as our most effective tool for deterrence. So use your head, stop the spread. Now, face coverings and masks are considered critical. Medical journals cite the chance of transmission without a face mask is 17.4%, while that fell to 3.1% when a face mask was worn. Compelling. So one small ask, please wear a mask. The impact on the economy? We're in an officially designated recession. Another 1.5 million Americans filed new claims for state unemployment insurance this past week, bringing the tally to more than 43 million people. Grim forecasts and new virus cases pierced Wall Street's bubble. The hunger crisis is worsening. Children are seriously compromised. The higher education is proceeding with behavior pledges, empty stadiums, and widespread testing, with 67% planning for in-person delivery, and the others, hybrid, online, we're still considering a range of scenarios. We recognize the mind-boggling public health logistics and ever-evolving recommendations, the need to address the ebb and flow of students with visitors and the like on and off campus, shifts in decision-making processes, and all their impact on facilities. Hence, our institutional duo panelists will share their return-to-work campus opening plans, along with their strategies for de-densifying their physical spaces. The road to reopening takes many paths. Let's start with our first institutional duo. Bill Nunez, Vice Chancellor for Business and Finance, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Bill is responsible for all business, financial, human resource, and facilities operations, campus planning and sustainability, and numerous auxiliary business services that support the university. At Nebraska, Nunez served as Associate Chancellor and Chief of Staff from 2010 through 2018, and Director for Research and Planning from 2003 to 2010. He joined Nebraska from the University of Louisville, where he served in the Office of Planning and Budget for 12 years. Nunez holds bachelor's and master's degrees in business and master's and doctoral degrees in education. And our second contributor of this duo, Jim Jackson, Associate Vice Chancellor of University Operations, also University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Jim is responsible for the administration and oversight of maintenance operations, utilities, landscape services, custodial services, business operations, sustainability, environmental health and safety, parking and transit services, printing and mail distribution services, fleet management, surplus inventory, facilities inventory, and moving services. He has a wealth of experience in change management and has fostered and mentored a team of innovative, flexible, and committed individuals. Jim believes his success as a leader is underpinned by his philosophy of collaboration, training, trust, empowerment, and striving toward an all-inclusive workforce. Jim has authored chapters on preventive maintenance implementation, career ladders, and position descriptions, and the APPA publication, Maintenance Operational Guidelines for Educational Facilities, 2nd edition. He holds the APPA CEFP, Certified Educational Facilities Professional, credential, and currently serves as APPA's president-elect. Bill and Jim, let's hear how you have unpacked both the academic and operational aspects of space and the logistical support required at UNL.
Thank you, Lander. Appreciate it. I'm very glad to be here. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And my thanks to my good friend Ted Widener for recommending me to be a panelist today. It's an honor to speak with you all. So let's go ahead and get started. Today's session, let's go to the next. Today's session is about de-densification of campus, but really what all of us are pursuing is a forward to fall, a campus-wide planning effort to prepare for the fall semester, but also accounting for the vast implications of the pandemic. During the first part of today's presentation, you'll hear about the efforts in Nebraska regarding our fall planning, specifically academic planning from me and operational planning from Jim Jackson. This next slide shows that Forward to Fall is the title we're using to designate our planning effort that extends well beyond the spatial issues. This is not unique nationally, as it's a common label to signify a unified planning direction for institutions. At Nebraska, it means we're working collectively to maximize the student experience while concurrently doing what's necessary to ensure campus safety to the extent possible. It means asking and being able to answer three key questions. How are we ensuring health and safety? What will academics look like? What are we doing to support you? And in this case, you is all the individuals who comprise the campus community. So I'll dive deeper into this concept on the next slide. Our fall planning and the de-densification of our campus community is built upon several key principles that we've articulated. One, the health and safety of our UNL community, the health and safety of visitors to our campus, the health and safety of our broader community. Importantly, continuing our land-grant missions of education, research, creative activity, and engagement, setting clear overall university policies and guidelines based on state and local health guidance and best known practices for the time, and providing for localized decision-making to best meet the university's policies and guidelines. All of these items create the foundation for the academic and spatial planning we are conducting. One very positive byproduct of this effort is how all of the academic and business operations sides have come together to address and solve these vast challenges. It's a very visible and active level of reliance on each other and partnership from all involved. This next slide gives you an idea of scale. Nebraska this fall semester has 9,349 classes and 340 active classrooms. These are taught in rooms scheduled to accommodate as few as a dozen students to several hundred. Like all of you, these rooms have movable desks, fixed desks, movable tables, fixed tables, tiered classrooms, movable seats, tiered classrooms with fixed seats, bench labs, and very many other variations. Plus, as you all are aware, these rooms are all varied in terms of size and volume. As you can see on this slide, the effort started with CAD modeling of 6 feet distancing. Several variations were tested for this effort. I'll go back one, please. But we're using existing national and local guidance of 6 feet. Once modeled, the revised capacities were calculated and provided to the academic units. The average calculation provided a factor of 31%, which is what these academic units were instructed to begin modeling their academic course delivery efforts. We then scheduled and performed a series of walkthroughs with the academic representatives themselves. Each classroom was visited and the physical room space was aligned with the CAD drawing. And after that, actual final counts were tallied and made. Seats were moved if allowable, and the seats were taped for those that can be occupied. After this effort, we calculated about a 35% overall capacity was the end net result. This differed for labs where extended bench space was already part of the design, but auditorium seating proved to be a little less able to de-densify, just given the configuration and some of the age of our facilities. This next slide provides that visual for the testing and configuration and scenarios in CAD. While 6 feet has been the guidance used, this additional modeling will be very helpful if physical guidance is changed or the distance standards are reduced either nationally or regionally. Once the room modeling was complete, distance standards and expectations were layered into a building floor plan as represented on this next slide. You can see the red honeycomb rendering. This proved to be helpful for very many reasons. First, we were able to calculate and communicate new capacities or new capacities in advance to the academic units. This means the academic staff were concurrently working through their course planning while we were still in the modeling process. Second, it allowed academic leaders to visualize the location and impact. This is a very important part of the process, as it not only showed the room, but allowed for visualization of contiguous spaces and other potential space usage around that classroom. And third, and maybe more importantly, it became a means of communication by the departments to individual faculty, which then triggered conversations about academic course delivery. And in the next slide, we show up a mock-up of how this transpired. So this is simply a mock-up of the effort to establish a 6-foot distancing parameter. You'll see a 6-foot PVC pipe to provide a quick measurement, and blue tape, which signifies the seats to be occupied. And while this is just a mock-up of the effort, this same technique was applied across the university as we modeled each and every one of those classrooms. In this next slide, you'll see 3 distinct examples of classroom configurations: movable desks, movable tables, and a tiered room in its final configuration. In this case, the tiered classroom happens to have movable chairs, but the same configuration was applied, if we could, in fixed chair configurations. If you look at the bottom photo, you'll see that these red circles highlight blue tape where students will be instructed to sit when the fall semester arrives and they get their guidance. As I indicated early in the process, we distributed data, which is reflected on this next slide. This was provided to them to aid in their planning. This slide shows a sample in the form of visualizations and tabular data, nothing too elaborate, but the particular view in this one shows the added column on the verified seat counts after the visit. This is important, but you can't see the specifics given the size of this tabular data, but some spaces actually had wide variation at the end of the process due to room size and the configuration, which I think is inherent with the process at all of our campuses regardless. So let's go to the next. So similar, I'm sure, to what you all are doing, my session represents just a piece of a much larger effort in Nebraska to de-densify all 4 quarters of our campus. However, in each of these situations, we really are following these same principles and guidance that we've established at the inception. Instead of closing my particular section with lessons learned, I thought it might be more appropriate to talk about lessons learning, because really there is no playbook, and as we all are doing, we are learning as we go and learning from each other. When we look at the national context and that of our peers, we see that each of us are trying to be as thoughtful and prudent as possible, but also forward-looking. But we don't want to get too far out in front as the landscape continues to change. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. We also know that different parts of the country experienced and are still experiencing very different levels of this pandemic. We know our institutional planning absolutely needs to adapt to this. We also need to stay incredibly flexible and don't assume things will get better or don't assume things will get worse, but be flexible and adaptable when the situation changes. A couple of ongoing items from the academic planning side that we really hadn't considered at the beginning that I thought might be helpful to folks on today's call. The first is teaching modalities and the use of technology. We thought most all classrooms were video enabled. They are not. We are fixing this over the summer as mixed modes of instruction will be required during this pandemic and because of de-densifying of our classrooms. We also thought multiple rooms could simulcast to overflow rooms if needed. This really hadn't been done at scale, and so now this is part of the dialogue and part of our ongoing planning for forward to fall. The modeling above also doesn't mention about building ingress, egress, as well as queuing prior to classes. While not in the slideshow, it is indeed part of our planning efforts. We are looking at all adjacencies and other opportunities for queuing. As in Nebraska, like many of your locations, outside winter is sometimes not an option. And so finally, with all this work, we're also understanding there's concern from faculty, and many of whom could be considered in a high-risk bracket, that they wish to teach remotely and not in person. This is kind of counter to our guidance for forward to fall, and it is what our students want, but it also has the potential to change the final fall calculations of site-based instruction. This will continue to evolve here in Nebraska, and I'm sure at your institutions as well, so be sure to ask those questions as part of your planning and accommodate those new pieces of information as they elevate. This completes my section of it, so I'll now pass the session to Jim Jackson, who'll talk through operational issues related to de-densifying campus and our Forward to Fall initiative. So thank you all for listening. Jim?
Thank you, Bill. So I just wanted to follow up with some of the information that we've learned in the physical distancing challenges. We're going to start with transportation and our particular campus. We've got a city and an east campus that are spread apart by close to 3 miles. And our local, we contract with our municipal bus service right now, and their numbers coming back with their styles of buses, we're only allowing 9 to potentially 10 people per bus. So as you can see in this slide here, we've worked with an outside contractor to procure some buses to support the movement of our ridership. And as you can see in the pictures there, they're able to come up with a physical distance across the aisles, and then add the clear protection between the seats, which then allows us to have 27 people per bus. And based on our ridership numbers and the 2 routes that we run, we're going to have to come somewhere if we decide to go at 100% capacity. So that number is still kind of being juggled around a little bit to what is the capacity. Will people, students, faculty, and staff feel comfortable riding in public transportation? So as we start to work on some of the logistics of moving them around, those are numbers that we have not been able to settle on. But if we did go at full capacity, it would need an additional 8 buses per day, 11 hours a day to help us transport our students. And that's just locally here on our campus. We can go to the next slide, please. So one of the one of our goals here is to, when our students return, is to make the campus look different as well. And I've heard, you know, the term psychological cleanliness and wellness, and so we're kind of trying to put that out there for when our students walk in and enter the buildings, that it looks different, it feels different, but yet not overpower and make it too you know, hard to follow the rules and stuff. And so we've really worked hard on signage. And as we've gone through this, as you can see, there's some signs on elevator guidelines. You can see the symptomatic guidelines, hand washing recommendations. But it also goes way deeper than that with a lot of the signage that we're working on within our labs, within pinch points, directional movement. Again, what doors are we going to go in and out of? And a lot of that still depends on whether or not we are going to do testing. So there's so many unknowns right now of what types of additional signs and signage and directional. But as you get into the labs, there's going to be more instructional, customized signs. We're also working on exemptions to where additional actual PPE may be required with gowns and N95 masks, and working to have our students and instructors fitted with those through our environmental health and safety. So, and we can move on to the next slide, please. And so really, the goal behind adding some of the operational pieces to dedensification is the huge lift that's been put on operations in supporting that. And some of the ideas that we came up with, you know, as we all know that there's going to be hand sanitizing needs across campus, sourcing the health and wellness supplies such as hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, disinfectant, not only for the students and instructors in the classrooms, but for our own operational staff. We're also working with the academics and to figure out what it is and communicate clearly what the role of our staff, custodial staff, and our maintenance technicians to help support this. So in essence, we're spending a lot of time repurposing our mission on campus right now to be able to support this reopening. The other piece is locating the health and wellness supplies. Where do they need to be? How many times are the intensity levels of disinfecting restrooms, and being able to communicate what it is that may have to slide in the times that we're spending more focus and time on cleanliness and again, keeping signs up and keeping dispensers filled. And one thing for note, we are working with a number of people to figure out what it is we're going to look like outside. And so that's something that's still not decided. And again, there's all different levels of awareness and concern. And as we all know, everything's kind of been a moving target. And in facilities, we're used to having a goal and heading towards that. But once again, we're in the unknown right now, and as Bill said, continually learning. And so it is kind of challenging to make all these adjustments. And next slide, please. So one of the things we thought would be really beneficial is to go out and put a site up to where our staff could, and faculty staff and other instructors could go straight to a site to order their needs, the disinfectant needs, the health and wellness supplies. We've been able to work in our university inventory to start planning on the receiving and distribution of those products. We also are setting up major dispensers up in entryways and common areas, and focus on high traffic areas, high circulation areas that we will be responsible for, and continually keep them filled with a real focus on making sure that soap dispensers in restrooms and towels and everything is just, fully stocked multiple times a day. And at the same time, working with the departments and researchers to be able to provide dispensers and disinfectant for them in their private spaces. And then the other thing that is becoming a challenge is providing kits to each and every classroom, and whether it's a general purpose classroom or a departmental classroom, to make sure that the instructors and or some identified folks can do what they need to do to or have the products available to disinfect and take care of their areas, because we just will not have the resources to cover every touch point here in campus. So next slide, please. So again, I know that Lillette was on last week or the week before and talked about some of the energy setbacks and some of the challenges while the buildings were set back or idling. And one of the things that has been coming up a lot is the reopening of buildings and how that's going to look. And one of the things that we did when we set the buildings back is we through our building automation system, we were able to program the buildings to come back on pretty much with a click of a button. And so as we started a soft opening, I guess is what the term is, over through June, and June 15th, our daycare opened today, I believe, and some other areas are really starting to open. And there's some areas that never did shut down with research and some other spaces like that. So we've been able to learn from this and program. We've identified many more critical spaces that needed, that could not be set back. And so a lot of it is, again, focusing on a slow start and how we're going to actually do this. In our buildings are in lockdown till July 1. People are trickling back, doors are locked. As a part of that, we had to set up a central receiving point here. Once it was announced that we're potentially opening in July, our packages coming in increased close to 70 to 80%. So all of these little pieces that are happening, and especially with the de-densification of the buildings, they're looking at every space. So packages are having to be stored other places. A lot of the furniture that may be moved. There's just a bunch of different challenges that go along with the space that we're setting aside, whether it's a storeroom or a larger storage area. Departments are looking at all space and going through that. One other piece that we did that I felt was helpful to help get the de-densification and process going is we have a standard construction request for estimate website that's out on our site at our homepage, and we added a COVID-19 button on there. So when people are requesting plexiglass or some type of protection or different exemptions and stuff, as they start to come in and come up with that, with ideas, we're able to run those through facilities, work with code officials, making sure that they're not blocking entries and exits, covering up sprinkler heads. A lot of the departments out there, I've heard through other peers, some people are just saying, go do what you need to do, and we'll deal with it later. And others are being more strict and guidelines and getting requests to figure out what's going to work. And again, not blocking airflow and the amount of air movement in buildings, and the plexiglass can cause that to happen depending on the configuration of the room. So there's, again, so many ongoing considerations, unknowns. There's multiple things that I'm sure we haven't thought of. I feel that we're in a really good spot to support the academics, and our goal has been to keep our eye on the ball of what it is we can control in this, what it is we know, and can be positive of, and that is that we are going to try to open. So how do we best support that? And so that's kind of where we're at. Was there another slide? Okay, well, with that, Lander, I will turn it back to you.
That's excellent. Both Bill and Jim have highlighted some really important points. They were showing their calculations and modeling scenarios so that they could use it to communicate in advance and provide the kind of visualization tools that could help their course schedules and delivery. That was a really important point, both along with the visualizations and the tabular data. The fact that, Bill, you said there's no playbook is for sure, and that instead of lessons learned, it's lessons learning is so important. It was very thoughtful and forward-looking by both of you, the need to be flexible and adaptable. And Jim, you really got us into a great discussion on the mobility issues of your own university shuttle, but what everyone's going to be dealing with to get to get folks to campus, because that's where transmission occurs greatly. So you really introduced the issue of transportation. There are going to be some questions on that. I think they're really great. So we'll get to those after our second duo. And then finally, Jim, you highlighted beautifully the logistical issues around all of this. And there's so many of details that people don't realize. So I appreciate what you were providing to that discussion on a side that really is behind the scenes. So thank you so much. I'm going to move now to our second duo. John Noonan, Vice President for Facilities, Duke University. John was appointed Duke's Vice President for Facilities in 2011 after coming to Duke University as its Associate Vice President for Facilities in 2005. Responsible for Duke University's campus of buildings and grounds and a workforce of 550 staff members, John leads Duke University's Facilities Management Department and its 5 functional areas, directing the overall operations of the university to ensure ongoing safety, integrity, value, and sustainability of Duke's world-class facilities. Duke Facilities Management includes facility operations, operations maintenance, renewal of campus facilities, the Office of Project Management, Planning, Design, Construction, Utilities and Engineering, Infrastructure, Safety, Energy, Landscape Services, Campus Grounds and Athletics Fields, University Environmental Services, Housekeeping, Sanitation, Recycling, as well as Finance and Administration. Prior to Duke, John was with Brown University for 13 years as its Vice President for Facilities. Earlier, he held positions in consulting engineering and project management firms, as well as residual and commercial real estate development. He has worked in California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York. John holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute and a Master's degree in Business Administration from Columbia University. And our second contributor of this duo is Adem Gusa, Assistant Director of Planning and Design, Duke University as well. Adem was born in Summit, New Jersey. Adem also lived in Columbus, Ohio, and Kenya, East Africa during his childhood. He graduated from Miami University, Ohio, with a BA in architecture and received a master's in city planning from Georgia Tech. He spent 9 years in Atlanta as an architectural consultant in the private sector, working primarily on building and space programming and campus master planning projects for numerous colleges and universities throughout the U.S. In 2007, Adem joined Duke Facilities Management as the Assistant Director of Planning and Design. His primary responsibilities include facilities planning, building programming, space, and campus planning. He oversees the team responsible for space planning, campus GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and CAD, Computer-Aided Design Files. Adem and his wife live in Durham and have a 15-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. John and Adem, let's hear about your return to work facilities toolkit and the approach you are taking to social physical distancing for the myriad space types on the Duke University campus.
Thank you, Lander. That was great information from Jim and Bill, and I think what Adem and I have to talk about will supplement that nicely. So good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody's doing fine during these difficult times. Certainly a challenge for all of us since we've never seen anything like this before. Like all of you, Duke went from a fully active campus to an almost vacant one in a relatively short period of time. That being said, the campus never closed. Certain functions remained open. Utility systems, for example, some levels of research, certainly our medical center campus as well. So now that we have to gear back up for reopening, we've done several things, and we'll get into some of that. We have so far already opened up our research labs. By the end of this week, School of Medicine and university labs will be open. So several thousand employees have come back to the laboratories. But as we look forward to opening the rest of the campus for the fall, clearly the number one thing is safety of our students, faculty, and staff. And as you all know, social distancing is one of the 3 main recommendations, along with washing and wearing a mask. I wanted to take a couple minutes just to provide maybe a slightly higher level view of reopening as it relates to the social distancing. And then I'll turn it over to Adem for a closer look regarding today's topics. So as you can see on the next slide, Duke University has produced what we call a guide for returning to the workplace. And this went out to the entire campus several weeks ago. They do make some edits to this document as we learn things, and things are changing every 5 minutes, if not quicker. Just a couple of things highlighted. I know you can't read that slide, but it's just merely meant to point out that social distancing is kind of starting at the top, and those dotted areas of text that you see on the slide reference social distancing and responsibility to do so. A companion document to this, if you go to the next slide, please, is what we call the facilities toolkit. So we wanted to make a companion document to drill down into some more details regarding facilities that would be helpful to not only our customer base, but also our facilities management staff as well. On the next slide, you'll see what we call kind of the overall chart for the reopening. And on the far left, I know it's hard to read, but this covers several areas from cleaning and disinfecting to preparing the buildings, flushing water systems, for example, installing hand sanitizers, work in landscape services. And then I'd like to point out a couple of things relevant to today's topic. So there is on the far right, you'll see support social distancing layouts, and that's what Adem will get into in more detail in a few minutes. But in the lower box, there's also a responsibility for the customer base, schools and departments at Duke, to figure out how they actually want to open up their buildings in terms of space utilization. So are they going to use all their classrooms, not all their classrooms, their break rooms, lounges, conference rooms? And then what we're providing through Adem's group is support services where we will go in and diagram out how many people they could put in that particular space. Another companion document to this one is shown on the next slide, where we have frequently asked questions. This document right now is growing almost daily, certainly weekly. It's several pages long at this point. And this is meant to be all FAQs related to facilities type questions and topics. And again, even in this particular document, the thread of social distancing layout is consistent. So it appears in this as well. A couple examples on the screen there about break rooms and reconfiguring space for distancing. So again, a common theme from kind of top to bottom. In the next slide, you'll also see another portion of the toolkit, which are signs and flyers. This just represents a few of the ones that are in the toolkit, along with some floor signage, which are essentially removable stickers that are available to the schools and departments through our department. So my message to all of you today is that this really has started at the top management level of Duke University, and then drilling down or filtering down to the schools and departments through us in facilities management as kind of the operational implementer for this work. Lastly, on the next slide, you'll see what we call a 2-week walk-up to a school opening, or a building opening, I should say. And the colors represent responsibilities. So again, social distancing layout is also required in here, keeping that consistent theme that I've mentioned. The green boxes indicate responsibilities of the customer base, schools and departments within the university. Blue represents facilities, and then the orange is the central emergency management office. It's not meant to represent every single task that has to occur, but these are the larger tasks that we need to have done certainly week 1 and week 2 as we go to open a building. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adem, who will drill down even further into the various types of layouts that he and his group have studied. Go ahead, Adem.
Thanks, John. And thanks to the other panelists and to APPA and really everyone for joining here today. I think we're all in the same boat trying to figure this out together. So the more dialogue we can have, the better the outcomes will be. So our department has been working with academic and administrative stakeholders all throughout campus, basically to assist in determining the impacts of the 6-foot distancing. We've been utilizing CAD files and on-site walkthroughs, basically to determine the layout distancing and circulation impacts of 6-foot distancing requirements. And so far, we've done hundreds of individual spaces around campus, and specifically class labs, seminar rooms, and auditoriums, of which there's about 286 of them, 131 class labs, research labs, dining facilities, break rooms, lounges, open office environments, and most recently, PE and rec centers. And the process involves walking the spaces to verify or basically lay out the FF&E layout, which is often missing. And this is what University of Nebraska also meant. You pretty much have to go on site to verify your drawings and to make sure you're dealing with the latest and greatest information on your drawings. And the feedback is going to inform the maximum capacities of spaces and, in a lot of cases, the numbers of sections needed for classes and class labs as we head back into the fall. So now I'm going to walk you through a small sample of representative spaces over the next few slides. So first up is a representative sample of a tiered lecture style classroom with fixed tiers, fixed tables, and fixed seats. So in a lot of ways, this is the most restrictive of environments that we're dealing with, in the sense that really nothing is movable. So you have to deal with what's there on the ground and make the best of it. So it's inefficient in the sense that for social distancing, you end up with a lot of odd spacing and gaps, as you can see from the diagram there on the left. Those are 3-foot radius circles. And you can see that there's a lot of odd spacings and gaps in the space there. And the current seat count for a space like that is 88 seats, which is roughly 25 square feet per station. And with the 6-foot distancing in place, we're down to 26 seats available, which is at 84 square feet per station. And that's less than 30% of the total seats. So it's a significant decline in impact from what's there now. And moving on to the next slide, you can see a similar type of space that's a little bit more flexible. So in this space, it's a bit of a larger room. It has fixed tiers and fixed tables, but flexible seats. So in this example, you have the ability to kind of maximize the 6-foot distancing for a little bit more of an efficient layout with the seats themselves. You have less of those kind of random spacings and gaps that we saw on the previous slide. But also, unfortunately, with this layout, you end up having to essentially work with every other seating row. So based on the 6-foot distancing, we have to go every other row to get that distancing in place. And what that results in is a maximum capacity of 111 as it's currently designed, which is roughly 20 square feet per station. And with the distancing in place, we're down to 30 seats at 74 square feet per station, which is 27% of the total. So this is even less than the previous space. We're now well under 30% of the total number of seats available. The next example gets into more of the full flexible environment that we have throughout campus. This is an example of a 28-seat classroom with full flexible movable tables, movable chairs. In this example, it's filled with tablet arm chairs. And there's 28 in there now, roughly 20 square feet per station. And the tablets offer the most flexibility with regards to the 6-foot distancing. You can really maximize the circulation and distancing required for this. And what that results in is 12 seats out of 28 at roughly 48 square feet per station. And what we're advocating for here in a lot of instances like this is that the excess seats be removed. So in an ideal situation, the classroom is configured optimally based on the 6-foot distancing. Prior to the classes beginning, they're set up that way, and the excess tables and chairs are removed just to eliminate the confusion and have it set up the way that we'd think is most ideal based on the 6-foot distancing. The next slide shows the same exact classroom, but it shows the yield that you get with tables and chairs. So the previous example, we got 12 out of there using the tablet arms. And in this example, we're essentially down to 9 seats. A little bit less efficient, obviously you've got larger writing surfaces. And it's roughly the same 9 seats when you go into a U shape versus the rows that we're showing here. And at 9 seats, we're at 63 square feet per station. And again, just showing the example of how the same classroom can be configured with either tablets or tables and chairs, and what the yield is as a result of that. On the next slide, we're showing a couple of examples of class labs. And interestingly, with class labs, there's other factors which can actually dictate the maximum capacity in addition to the 6-foot distancing. So the spaces that you see in the middle there, highlighted in yellow, are all chemistry class labs. And in this instance, it was determined that we don't want any more than 1 student per hood in the chemistry class labs, versus typically what we have is 2 students per hood. So right off the bat, we're going from 14 students per chemistry lab down to 7 based on that limiting factor. And that reduction in capacity by 50%, it actually has significant impacts on the number of class lab sections needed. So again, we're reducing the capacity by half, which essentially then doubles the amount of sections that you need. And there's issues there with regards to simply how do you accommodate that many more sections? Do you have the teaching assistant and graduate assistant availability to even teach those extra sections? One thing that we're starting to face is that a lot of our TAs and GAs are international students. We're not even sure if they're going to be back in the fall based on COVID travel restrictions. So there's all sorts of ripple effects that come into play once you start putting these distancing and limiting factors in, which then have, ripple effects on numbers of increased class counts and section counts. On the next slide, we're kind of moving away from the classroom environment and into dining. So you're looking at the plaza level of our main student union, and there's a lot going on here. It's kind of hard to read, but the impacts on dining are also significant. And what we're showing here in the center core there is sort of our prep area and serving area. And then all around the perimeter, what we're showing is the impact of the social distancing on the seating configuration. Most of the seats in this student union are 4-person tables. And so right off the bat, in most of these instances, we're going from 4-person tables down to 1-person tables. And if anyone's been in the Broadhead Center during the lunch hour, it's already very difficult to find any seating. So with the current seat count of about 438, with 6-foot social distancing in place, we're down to 121 available seats, which is roughly 27% of the available seats in there. So the ripple effects of this are that you have to kind of rethink of the way that you provide, food service. So, one of the possibilities that we're looking at, no decisions have been made yet, but one opportunity might be to go to sort of a grab and go type of scenario where you essentially get a to-go box and you've got to basically find another place to have your food with social distancing in place, just because it's going to be very difficult to find any available seating here in this student union. On the next slide, we're looking at the impacts on sort of a work environment. And what we found is that for the office environments, the social distancing impacts are mostly found in the common spaces, such as the conference rooms, the break rooms, and the restrooms. At Duke, the workstations don't really appear to be an issue because most of them are greater than 6 feet apart. So in this example, we're indicating the maximum capacities in those common spaces with the squares with the numbers in them. And we did a little call out. So there's a break room in the center there that we're calling out larger there on the left, just to kind of show what the impacts are. So in this example, we're indicating the maximum capacity, and we're showing kind of how you can fit in this break room. You can have one person in front of the sink, another in front of the refrigerator, another in front of the coffee maker, and then kind of individual seats, basically resulting in a maximum capacity of 8 people in this space. And the intent here would be to indicate those maximum capacities with some signage, and John Noonan showed some examples of the signs earlier. So for all of these common spaces, there would be a sign on the door indicating the maximum capacity. Now for us, we've decided that for restrooms, the limiting factor would be the numbers of sinks. So you can see there in the restroom cores, 3 maximum capacity in both the male and female restroom. And again, that's just a function of the number of sinks in that room. We don't want to have more people in there than are available sinks. On the next slide, this is really just kind of summarizing and lessons learned, or I liked the term that Bill used earlier, which was, lessons learning, since this is such a rapidly changing environment. It's really hard to come to any conclusions just yet. But I'm just going to recap some of the things that I've mentioned just to kind of drive some points home. So test fits, number one, test fits are critical. And we realized early on that doing the test fits is the only way to really get accurate counts in these spaces. It's too difficult to use kind of like hypothetical calculated impacts just by using math. Every space is different. And so you have to look at kind of each representative space type and really lay that out to get a true sense for what the impacts are of social distancing. Also, as mentioned before, the number of sections needed to teach the same number of students sometimes doubles. Again, so the ripple effects here, just in terms of number of sections and teaching availability, becomes a big issue. For number 3 there, class labs, it can be the equipment as the limiting factor. I mentioned fume hoods, it could be microscopes, it could be other pieces of equipment that kind of add that extra element in there that you've got to factor in addition to the 6-foot distancing. At least here at Duke, we're not seeing many issues in open workstations. Shared offices can be an issue, but for the open workstation environments, we're not seeing a lot of impacts based on 6-foot distancing. The dining impacts are significant. I mentioned the grab and go concept that may become the norm. Other ways to kind of mitigate that 6-foot distancing are being explored as well. Potential tent usage on campus or other things such as that. Haven't really talked much about dorms, but one thing we're considering is for those doubles that are a little bit tight, they're going to be converted to singles. So, that has ripple effects on student life and on campus capacity. And we're having to kind of get creative with how we can find additional beds, whether it be partnering with neighboring apartment complexes, whether it's setting aside blocks of rooms in our university hotel. We're having to get real creative to deal with distancing inside the dorm environment. And the last point on there, which is a little bit cut off by the summary table, is that early communication with the provost office, senior administration, and registrar's office is really key, because answers are needed here rapidly, and there's real-time decision-making happening on a daily basis. And so the better and clearer lines of communication you have with key decision makers on campus, then the more informed everyone is, and the quicker decisions can be made.
I think you did a fantastic job, both John and Adem. There were so many different points that I captured that I had seen the guidelines way earlier on, John, and that so piqued my interest that I wanted to get you into this particular town hall, and you graciously agreed. On top of that, each of you were able to get us into this whole concept of communication, and ensuring that we are doing this early on, having good channels, because that real-time decision making. I did like that you recognize that this started at the top for policy and then facilities implementation at the, definitely the devil is in the details, and you have lined that out just as UNL did. You got to a lot of the dialogue. I was not necessarily surprised, but it reinforces that we're losing so much in terms of total seats. At that capacity drops significantly, and how that's affecting class scheduling, course scheduling, staggering, etc. We'll want to ask some questions. And I very much appreciated all the different types of DIM that you got into. People had been asking about dining, and you got us into the fact that we have to rethink food service delivery and grab and go boxes. So the ripple effects are huge, and both of you did a wonderful job in getting us to where we need to go. We have a lot of questions, and I want to get to them right now. I'm going to go a little bit backwards to go forward, coming back to UNL, and some questions that came up right away as you were talking about this. So Bill and Jim, I'll put you on point for a moment, and I may ask for Duke to answer some of these too, because they relate to Duke's presentation as well, and some questions people have. One, the first one was how you accounted for the instructor use and movement around podiums and whiteboards. It didn't appear addressed in the honeycomb model. Bill, can you help us with that?
Yeah, I can. Again, there's so much complexity built into the modeling that these considerations are mainly being held at the local level, but the guidance is as follows. If we look at the multi-modality of the classes that will be offered, most won't be static, given what our great colleagues at Duke just articulated as we did about the capacity of these classes. We won't have the capacity to add teaching capabilities. And so with our fixed teaching, as well as this distribution of classes, most classes will be taught in a static fashion with multimedia video, so that the professor will mainly stay static. In addition to that, the technology will have to be enhanced. So whiteboards, chalkboards, some of that will almost be deemed obsolete with the course delivery in fall. So I think a couple of things I'll just simply say is, just due to the environment, the teaching will be quite different and less mobile, if I can call it that. Secondarily, most of these typically analog models will shift to digital. I don't know if Jim or our friends from Duke can address that as well.
John?
This is John.
Go ahead.
We're looking at several things for the instructor. There hasn't been any real decision at this point, and certainly one size is not going to fit all, as was just mentioned. But they're talking about even possibly issuing, for example, instructors a lapel microphone that might help project their voice and keep some distance, so they don't have to maybe raise their voice. They even talked about a plexiglass shield, which might seem kind of odd, but that has been actually presented and put on the table. Don't know if we would go with that or not. And then again, they're not even settled on how many classes and how many sections will be online versus face-to-face. And a lot of that depends on the classroom capacities that we just both examined, as well as, truthfully, the faculty and their comfort level, their risk levels, et cetera.
Yes, and that is coming up a fair amount. Any other comments from panelists?
Yeah, I would just point out too, Lander, as all of us and the SFOs and within the APPA organization have talked about, is the aging workforce that we face in facilities alone. And as you start to work through what is high risk and pre-existing conditions, and that's going to dictate a lot of the placement of faculty staff and even facilities workers as well. So that's looking forward as to how we adjust and adapt to that as well.
A very good point that's coming up. It came up on the last 2 town halls, so I encourage people to go to those as well with some additional ideas on this. I'm being asked a question, I think both of you, both teams and duos could help with, is this how you're handling performance spaces, maybe the performance arts, the theater spaces, etc. Maybe Dan?
For some of our performance space, in particular dance, they've put out basically a doubling of the social distancing minimum. So whereas we're looking at 6 feet for most of the campus, there's a 12-foot requirement for them, with the understanding that, you know, essentially they just need more room to spread out and do what they need to do in that environment. So you have to look at what the function of the space is and how that function then has an impact on social distancing. And at least in the example of dance, it doubles the distancing requirement. And that's the only example that I'm aware of in terms of kind of performance spaces.
And this is Bill. I'll add to Adem's commentary, which is the same conversations that are happening here in Nebraska, with one additional point of commentary, and that is the timeline of the engagement. So some of these performance or practice spaces could be 2-3 hours in duration. Those are also being truncated to account for the CDC guidance and the time value.
That's an excellent point. I'm glad you added that as well. And the doubling, no one had talked about that, Adem. So between the two of you, really given us some great new information here. I'm going to go to furniture. A lot of questions came up about furniture. Are you leaving furniture in place? Will instructors be enforcing social distancing? Are you making it the students' responsibility in terms of how you're either relocating furniture, marking furniture? I mean, I think you've talked about this, some of it, but could you give just a few more details around this whole issue of furniture so that we could get our heads wrapped around that?
I mentioned during my segment that we'd like to ideally set the rooms up with the maximum capacity in place. So in an ideal scenario, the number of excess tables or chairs would simply be removed out of the space. Now there's obvious kind of operational and logistical challenges that come with that. And in an ideal world, there's adequate storage within that facility to have the excess furniture. But there's going to be instances where that's not possible. But ideally, we would like to remove the excess furniture from the spaces.
And this is John. If I can just maybe add to what Adem said. So on that slide I showed with the floor signs, there's a couple small stickers, 3-inch diameter stickers. We've actually changed the graphic. One's going to have a green check mark, the other one's going to have a red X. And so in classrooms where the furniture is fixed, we will probably put one of these stickers, like a check mark. Green check mark means you sit in that seat versus the other seat. In the library, or libraries at Duke are going to probably use that sticker extensively. They have so much furniture, the big study tables, that's probably not going to be feasible for them to move a lot of that out. So they're going to go with similar to what we saw from Nebraska, with a mark on the chair. We'll have a sticker on the table or the chair, either sit here or don't sit here.
I'll chime in as well. Very similar here at Nebraska, but a couple of things I'll mention, and these are logistical questions and issues, and administrative costs, if we can throw that in too. Our effort has really tried to minimize moving to some degree for a couple of reasons. One, I already mentioned the logistics of it all. We don't simply have the storage space or labor to do that here. Secondarily, we're using it for a barrier to create this distance, so it's almost like a forced 6-foot distance. And thirdly, and this is the more concerning element, what happens if we do get lesser guidance? What if 6 turns to 3 in October? I don't anticipate that, but we have to think through the flexibility of this pandemic, and we've all seen just dramatic shifts over the past 3 or so months. If it does get worse, does 6 turn to X higher, or does it shift down to a 3? So these are the things all of us, our Duke friends included, are all thinking about on a daily basis, and simply just watching and keeping daily tabs on the pandemic and different levels of outbreak across the nation.
Terrific. Any of you considering alternative spaces for instruction, like the conversion of gyms or any of that kind of thing for larger class sizes?
Yeah, we are. We're looking at many different options, including the club level of our football stadium tower. We're looking at now. There's all sorts of options being put on the table. No decisions have been made yet, but the understanding is that kind of all hands on deck, and that spaces that may not be considered for instruction should be considered for instruction. So yes, we are.
Okay.
Exact same answer. It's a super way of looking at it, being very flexible in how we do it. I think John mentioned the tent option, and that had been elevated here in Nebraska. Our biggest fear is the sub-zero weather in October, November. And so while that was an idea for the university that was floated, we really haven't entertained that, just given the sheer issues it might generate through weather.
Yeah, you know,
I could add to the tent thing. In terms of the tents, yeah, they're not as great an idea as they initially sound, and we just provided a guideline, two-page guideline yesterday. So there are many issues with having a tent out there for 10, 12 months, even in warm weather. We won't even air condition them, because that's probably going to cause more problems with mold and the virus than not. So folks can have a tent, probably won't be used for a classroom. It'd be open-sided tent, be more for social distancing if students wanted to go study there or eat their lunch there, but probably not classrooms.
Okay, great. That's excellent. CU Boulder said that they're using 8-foot hexagon model for social distancing, but they said that the CDC says space is from person to person versus on-center person to on-center person. Maybe Dim and then Bill could maybe touch on that. What do you think is the right model to use to get that 6-foot distancing? Because that's what they're asking, is they're trying to get a good sense from you.
I'll follow a Dem.
Okay.
I was going to say, I'll follow you on that one.
I have a terrible answer, so I'll let you go first.
No, I mean, you know, we're really looking towards the experts when it comes to that. I mean, you know, guidance from the CDC and other public health professionals is key when it comes to kind of figuring out the distancing aspects to this. And you know, in terms of, is the question about how to accommodate the 6-foot distance? Like, could you kind of maybe elaborate a little?
Yeah, they're trying to figure out what is the right model to use, because they were approaching it with an 8-foot hexagon model.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was about CDC saying space from person to person. That's where they were headed. And they really aren't trying to set you up, any of you. Yeah. They're just trying to get at it. So I appreciate
all I can say is that, you know, we haven't taken it beyond kind of the 6-foot circles.
And that's my answer as well. One thing I will throw in is I think there's a level of reasonableness test that needs to pass on all these models. And I think Duke has done an outstanding job, as has our team here at Nebraska, about looking at this in a very reasonable, but also leveraging the national, regional, local guidance that's been articulated by our health officials and so forth. You have to think reasonably about when a student comes into class, the ingress-egress issue I mentioned. You're going to not even uphold that 6-foot on the passing in the hallways, the exiting of the buildings. When they get back to the dorms, there's no way 6-foot will be the norm. And so in some way, we're doing our best to adhere to the guidance and build a plan around those elements. Knowing then it does have to shift to the individual to embrace those standards and take care of their health and well-being, and doing the best that we can to inform and educate along the way.
That's really great. We got to have individual responsibility and accountability along with institutional, and I think you've done a fabulous job, and I know CU Boulder appreciates your responses on that. Could I ask a few questions on the cleaning side? Have any of you received additional staff for additional cleaning? That could be a yes or no.
This is John. No, and I'm finally smart enough not to ask for it.
There you go.
No here too, Lander.
That's what I figured, and that's what I'm hearing everywhere.
However, our leadership has been very open-minded of listening to the impact as we repurpose our focus and what we do to intensify cleaning in areas. So they're gracious enough to, if it's, you know, what's the impact of us changing our focuses. So it's really good to have a good narrative behind whatever adjustments you need to make to support this effort.
Good.
Yeah, I think that's well stated. We actually have a model. We haven't got too far into it. Certainly other things are going to have to not be done so that we can go do enhanced cleaning, et cetera, around campus. Totally agree with our colleagues from Nebraska.
Excellent. Are you considering, I am not hearing many are cleaning between classes. Is that the case? Either Duke or UNL?
No, so Duke, we looked at that and it's just about impossible for us to do that given the number of classes, and the provost office registrar gave us a 30-minute window. We can't clean 350,000 square feet in 30 minutes in 50 different buildings 6 times a day. It would take an army.
Okay, very good. Understood.
Lander, as I mentioned a little earlier, we are building kits and they'll be located in the classrooms for faculty, instructors, students themselves, if they want to be able to go in and disinfect their site. There will be supplies to do that.
And Lander, I'd like to add to John's comment. I think what John said is very important. It would take an army. I think all of us need to do the best job we can in communicating what we can do and what we cannot do. We have about 160 custodians. We have 15 million square feet. The math that John gave is staggering to think about in terms of cleaning, but people think it's doable. So I think another job we all possess here is communicating what is real and reasonable and what is not along the path.
I'm so glad you highlighted it. It is absolutely clear that's the case. And every town hall, we have gone back to that and recognizing that we have to communicate what we can do, what we can't do. That's really fantastic. I did hear Jim in the building kits. Most people are providing self-cleaning wipes or other items. You have your hand sanitizer stations. You highlighted all of those things are being provided in these classrooms, in the hallways, in the traversed areas, and that is one of the ways in which you are extending disinfection. Everyone is equally yoked, right? Good. So I do have, I wanted to get a little bit to residence halls. Are you folks willing, or do you have some information you could provide on whether you're moving your residence halls to all single rooms, or are you changing those? Are you making permanent changes or future? Are you in charge of those in which you would, or would you know those answers? Lots of questions on that.
This is Adem. So we're involved as a resource to Res Life and Housing, and for most of the doubles, they are looking to move those towards being singles, except for those that are large in size. Another limiting factor that they're considering is the fixture counts. So they're considering models such as, you know, X number of students per shower or X number of students per toilet or sink. So that's all kind of, you know, in the mix as well, being considered. And as I mentioned, we are looking at partnering with either adjacent apartment complexes or university hotels as a possibility to help to offset the number of additional beds that we're going to have to basically acquire, or not acquire, but partner with to meet the housing needs.
Yes,
I'll just add one thing to that. Currently they're using a student to bathroom ratio of 4 to 1. in the planning as of today. That could change. So 4 students to 1 bathroom, sink, toilet, shower.
Excellent. Great information.
And at Nebraska, Adem did a good job of summarizing the kinds of principles that we're trying to adhere to, as well as improved custodial and cleaning standards for those shared bathrooms. I'm sorry, I think I interrupted Jim.
No, I was just going to point out too, one of the other thing that we're working on right now is setting aside isolation and quarantine space on campus, which is a placeholder for some of those available rooms as well. So that's impacting the count as well.
Yeah, that is something that we're doing as well. I neglected to mention that we have 2 of our smaller dorms on East Campus that have been set aside for potential COVID infection issues.
Yeah, we're also adding 1 off-campus property, so we're trying to get to 250 to 300 rooms available to quarantine based on a % of our undergrad population.
Got it. And I am hearing that people are setting aside, depending on their size of student enrollment, those kinds of numbers at the largest institutions. So right on point. I'm going to go to some of the bus stuff. And Jim, you had mentioned the transportation element. If that's okay, someone asked how UNL is handling the reconfiguration of bus stop pavilions.
Well, as far as that goes, nothing will change. Where the bus stops, where they're picking each other up, again, that's going to be on the individuals to physical distance within the waiting areas. And the one thing that we are again doing is doubling up, planning to double up on the times and schedules so that they're able to increase pickup times to almost not much of a waiting period. So again, we have not gone out to the outdoors in that area yet and talked about that. I kind of put the horse first and need to get the buses, and then that will be our next focus, but we haven't discussed that to this point.
Yeah, I also think it's important to note at Nebraska, for example, we don't really have enclosed bus stop stations. They're mainly open to the elements. As Jim mentioned, the time difference between the buses will be very, very short. And so those 2 elements should be good, but again, it does, as Jim mentioned, shift to the individual to physically distance themselves. Signage will be a big part of that as well on those stations, as well as the constant educational moments for our students.
Perfect. That's excellent. And CU Boulder did say that they discussed contact duration, and they said, and with masks worn and the duration short enough, which you just described, the both of you, it may be safe to increase density. So they offered that. I thought as a really good comment, and thinking about that type of model for provision. I think, Jim, you know your colleagues at CU Boulder, so that I thought that was a great addition that we could provide to everyone on the call. So I do have another question on residence halls, and it's around elevators. We didn't really touch on that. We touched on the rooms and some of the things that are happening there. The elevators are an interesting question. Could you talk about that, at least the advice that you're giving, and then I'll go to UNL?
Sure. This is John. We, through the medical center, doctors and researchers in our main safety office at Duke. So they, the only requirement on elevators is to wear a mask. So you could have 2 people, they won't be 6 feet apart. We don't have tall buildings. Kind of going back to that contact time, our medical professionals say you need really about 10 minutes of contact time. If you're riding up 1 stop in an elevator, you're not going to get that with a mask on. And it's the same reason we're not limiting entrances in and out, stairwells up and down, other than there's code issues with that as well. So that's what we're doing at elevators. Basically, it's a mask required. All elevators are being signed accordingly.
Perfect.
Yeah, and nothing different here at Nebraska except for one element, which I think is important to share, and that is on the move-in. we are going to, and you shouldn't laugh about this, but we're talking about the cruise ship model where that you drop your luggage and you go. We're paying outside vendor to be sort of a concierge service on the move in and move out, which will disallow the crossing of individuals, their families, and so forth. So it becomes a curbside scheduled materials to the third-party firm up to the designated rooms. And so you sort of negate this this elevator / hallway crossing during that very massive period. Other than that, it tends to smooth itself out throughout the school year.
Wow, that's a really great addition. Really great addition. And I had not heard that. And that is a really great approach to this. So Jim, I have one question on daycare, but we will get, as a matter of fact, I think our team is going to email you the question about how you open daycare, okay? Because that came up from Salvador Rodriguez. So we'll get you two connected. Is that okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, good. And then both of you, fabrication of signs on campus. A lot of signs. You both talked about it. I mean, massive. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, we're working with communications or UNL Communications. As a matter of fact, we've probably borrowed some of Duke's signs already and branded them our own. And so we're looking at some of the most intriguing signs out there relevant to us. And we do have a print copy business on campus. We are in the business, so we're able to mass produce signage, laminate them. We've created a poster deck that's on a website now that folks will be able to go in. We're taking care of all the commons areas. We've already got one campus done, just about done with our city campus. And so as they move inside to the labs and research areas, staff and instructors and folks will be able to order their own, working with the building maintenance reporters. So we haven't, the costs associated with that is as everything, we're trying to figure out who pays for what, who does what, and we're moving forward despite not having all those answers, but yes, we're printing and moving forward.
Okay, that's excellent. I have one last one I'm going to try to squeeze in, and it's around hallways. John, I think you mentioned that you weren't limiting entrances because of the short duration contact time. Anybody on hallways? John, Bill?
No limitation for us.
Okay. Bill, do you have any?
I mean, other than a mask.
Yeah, okay.
Nope, same in Nebraska.
Okay, very good. So there were some other questions that I will let folks know about moving from paper towels or blowers or anything in the restrooms, a schedule for cleaning and disinfecting water fountains, those kinds of things were answered. They're in our RAQs, recently asked questions from the last couple of town halls. So I think you'll find all of that available to you. So let's go quickly to close. We want to just thank profusely both our duos today from UNL and Duke. You did a fabulous job and you really fielded a ton of questions. We're very appreciative. We have a new resource. It's called Reopening Guidance for Campus Facilities that is now on our website. It was organized around institutional type. From all the uploads, we'll continue to take them, and as soon as you can get them, we've just added some new ones that we got from Duke today. And you can send them to me. You can send them to communications@appa.org. There's a standing call for images. You can see the slide on that in the details. There is also a slide for our available resources. And then we have a save the date for next week's topic, which is institutional duos, the road to reopening with your senior leadership team. It's going to be a great just 30-minute spots for each of those three institutions. I think you're going to get a lot of information from them, and we'll do Q&A after each of those slots, during those 30-minute slots. The following week will be on transportation and traversing to and from and within the campus. You heard some comments about that. We've got a nice group of people formed for that. So we hope that you enjoyed the Stephen M.R. Covey's presentation this past Tuesday, titled Inspiring Trust, Strong Teams in Our New Normal. This was provided in celebration of your support of APPA. I reminded folks that it is the strength of our core beliefs to trust in one another that will not only sustain us now, but will launch us into our new normal. From pandemic to protests, trust is key, and we have much to learn about trust. But one thing we should concede, trust must be considered the highest value in an organization. You have to give trust to get trust, and not trusting is the greatest risk today. We need a renaissance of trust, inspired trust. So take the first step. Choose to extend trust and inspire others to do the same. Thank you so much. We look forward to have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next Friday.